February 28, 1944. Oschersleben, Airfield, Germany. No 5:47 hours. Hauptmann. Dieter Hartmann sat in the cramped briefing room with 36 other pilots nursing bitter ersatz coffee that tasted like burnt grain. Outside the frost-covered windows, ground crews worked under portable lamps, their breath forming clouds in the pre-dawn cold. -12 Celsius. The kind of cold that made engines reluctant and men cautious. Hartmann was neither. At 32, he had been flying for the Luftwaffe since Poland. 5 years, 127 missions, 18 confirmed victories, 1,847 flight hours in his logbook. His hands bore scars from a cockpit fire over France in 1940. His eyes carried the particular weariness of men who had survived when statistics said they shouldn't. On the metal table before him lay a photograph. Anna, his wife, holding their daughter Greta at the zoo in Berlin. Greta was 4 now. In the photograph, she laughed at something beyond the frame. Hartmann had carried this image through 43 missions. It was creased at the corners, faded from sweat and handling. He slipped it back into his flight jacket's inner pocket. The briefing officer, an Oberleutnant with wire-rimmed glasses and a permanent desk pallor, stood before a large map of central Germany. Red lines marked bomber approach corridors. Blue circles indicated Luftwaffe bases. The map was covered in grease pencil marks from 100 previous briefings. The patterns never changed much. "Gentlemen," the officer began. His voice carried the flat authority of men who sent others to die but never went themselves.
Intelligence indicates another large formation inbound. Estimated strength 180 to 200 B-17 heavy bombers. Expected time over target 45 hours. Altitude 23 to 25,000 feet. Hartmann made notes on his kneeboard.
Same numbers as yesterday. Same numbers as the day before. Primary target appears to be the ball-bearing works at Schweinfurt. Secondary targets include synthetic fuel plants near Leipzig. The officer tapped the map with his pointer. Your intercept point will be here approximately 40 kilometers west of Kassel. Expected enemy fighter escort P-47 Thunderbolts, range limited as usual. Here it was, the gap. The blessed bloody gap that made German fighter operations possible. American bombers flew deep into Germany. American fighters escorted them part way. But the Thunderbolts, with their massive radial engines and limited fuel capacity, couldn't go all the way. Somewhere around the German border, they turned back. For perhaps 30 minutes, sometimes 40, the bombers flew unescorted. In that gap, German interceptors worked. You climbed, you attacked, you survived, or you didn't. But you did it without interference from enemy fighters hovering protectively above. The arithmetic was simple. It was calculate intercept point. Factor in climb time, fuel state, ammunition load. Execute attack during the window when bombers flew alone. For 3 years, this equation had held. Expected opposition intensity moderate, the briefing officer continued. Weather over target, scattered clouds at 15,000, broken at 22,000. Winds aloft, negligible. Questions? No one spoke. These men knew the drill. They had flown it too many times to count. Dismissed. Good hunting. The pilots filed out into the cold. Hartmann walked beside Lieutenant Klaus Weber, his wingman for the past 8 missions. Weber was 19 years old, with sandy hair and a face still touched by adolescent softness. He had 47 hours of training flight time. Pre-war pilots graduated with 250 hours. Now they sent boys with less than 50. "Herr Hauptmann," Weber said quietly as they walked toward the flight line. "About the American escorts." "Stay with me," Hartmann interrupted. "Watch your altitude. Don't chase damaged bombers below 10,000 feet. One pass, then climb away. If fighters appear, call them out and disengage immediately." "Yes, Herr Hauptmann." The boy was terrified. Hartmann could see it in the way Weber's hands flexed, the way his eyes tracked every sound. 8 missions. Statistically, Weber would be dead in 14 more. Fighter pilots in 1944 survived an average of 4 months. The odds were unforgiving. They reached Hartmann's aircraft, a Messerschmitt Bf-109 G6 painted in standard grey-green camouflage with yellow theatre identification bands. The individual aircraft number White 14 was stenciled on the fuselage. The ground crew chief, an Oberfeldwebel named Richter, stood beside the wing. "Herr Hauptmann, aircraft is ready. All systems functional. Ammunition load is full. 200 rounds for the nose-mounted MG-151 cannon, 300 rounds for each MG-131 machine gun." Hartmann circled the fighter slowly. The Bf-109 G6 was a brute, not elegant like the earlier models. The Daimler-Benz DB605 engine produced 1,475 horsepower at takeoff with methanol water injection.
Two 13mm machine guns fired through the propeller arc. One 20mm cannon shot through the spinner. Two additional 20mm cannons hung in underwing gondolas, adding killing power but making the aircraft heavy and sluggish. He checked control surfaces, examined tires, verified fuel quantity 88 gallons, enough for approximately 90 minutes flight time, including combat at emergency power. "She'll bring you home, Herr Hauptmann," Richter said. "She always has." Hartmann climbed onto the wing and lowered himself into the cockpit. The space was cramped familiar. His hands moved through pre-start checks without conscious thought.
Magnetos off, throttle closed, mixture control forward, fuel selector to main tank. Around him, 35 other fighters were waking up. Starter motors whined, propellers turned. One by one, engines caught with coughs of blue smoke that quickly disappeared into smooth mechanical thunder. At 07:15 hours, Hartmann's DB-605 roared to life. The aircraft trembled with contained violence. Oil pressure rose to 68 pounds. Temperature gauges climbed steadily. All instruments showed green. At 07:34, the tower cleared them for takeoff. Hartmann rolled onto the runway, advanced the throttle. The Bf-109 accelerated with brutal force, tail coming up at 55 miles per hour. At 112, he rotated. The fighter lifted cleanly into grey dawn sky. Gear retracted with mechanical precision. He banked left into the standard departure pattern. Below, Oschersleben airfield shrank to toy-like dimensions. Beyond it, Germany stretched away in winter colours. Brown fields,
Dark forests, villages clustered around church spires. It looked almost peaceful from 5,000 feet. 12 Messerschmitt 109s formed up in loose combat spread. Hartmann led from the front. Weber flew 500 meters to his right and slightly behind. The formation climbed steadily westward at 200 miles per hour. At 10,000 feet, Hartmann leveled off and began a fuel-conserving cruise, nursing every gallon toward the intercept point. The sky was empty. High clouds scattered across deep blue. Contrails from earlier missions drew white lines that slowly dissipated. Below-ground haze softened details. In the cockpit, Hartmann scanned methodically. 6 o'clock. 3. 12. 9. Up. Down. Check instruments. Check fuel. Scan again. Never stop scanning. The pilot who stopped scanning died. At 10:47 hours, ground control transmitted coordinates and timing. The bomber stream was inbound on schedule altitude 24,000 feet. Intercept in 23 minutes. Hartmann acknowledged and began climbing. The DB-605 howled at full power, engine temperature rising toward redline. At this altitude, in air containing only 40% of sea level oxygen, the supercharger screamed desperately, compressing thin atmosphere with mechanical violence. 20,000 feet, 22, 23. The formation struggled upward. Hartmann's airspeed dropped to 180 as the Bf-109 clawed for altitude in atmosphere too thin to provide easy lift. At 25,000 feet, he leveled. His fuel gauge showed 67 gallons remaining. 23 gallons was emergency reserve, 44 gallons available for combat and return flight. Perhaps 45 minutes. The clock was running. At 11:34 hours, they saw the bomber stream. It stretched across the sky like a mechanical migration. B-17 flying fortresses in their combat boxes, perhaps 180 aircraft total. Each bomber was a 4-engine giant bristling with defensive guns. The formations maintained tight discipline. Contrails from 1,200 engines drew parallel white lines across 25,000 feet. Hartmann's radio crackled. "Lead, this is 4. I count 16 boxes." "Confirmed," Hartmann replied. "Staffel, prepare to engage. Attack from 6 o'clock high. 1 pass. Climb away immediately. Execute on my mark." The 12 Bf-109s positioned themselves 3,000 feet above and behind the bomber stream. Hartmann selected a target, the trailing box of the 3rd Combat Wing, 6 B-17s in tight formation. He rolled inverted and pulled through into a diving attack. The world became speed and geometry. Air screamed over the canopy. Airspeed unwound rapidly, 180, 220, 260, 300 miles per hour. The Bf-109 shook with the violence of passage. Defensive fire erupted. Black puffs blossomed across 3 dimensions.
The American gunners were veterans. They led correctly adjusted fire, walked their bursts toward him. The bomber grew larger. 4 engines, high tail, olive drab paint with white identification stars. Hartmann pressed the trigger. The 20mm cannons hammered. Tracers arced toward the bomber in streams of red light. He saw strikes on the wing route, the sweet, vulnerable junction where structure met fuel tanks. Aluminum skin peeled away in bright ribbons. 2 seconds. The cannons fired 120 rounds per minute, 40 rounds expenditure. His aiming point tracked across the bomber's wing, walking destruction toward the fuselage. Then he broke hard left, pulling 6 gravities. The world grayed. Blood drained from his head. His G-suit inflated, squeezing legs and abdomen to keep consciousness from fleeing. He held the turn, straining against forces that crushed him into his seat. Behind him, the B-17 continued flying. Its formation didn't waver. Hartman swore quietly. He had hit cleanly. Good strikes. But these American bombers absorbed punishment that would obliterate any German aircraft. They were built like tanks with wings, redundant systems, armored crew stations, self-sealing fuel tanks. He reversed the turn and began climbing, nursing the throttle carefully. Temperature gauges climbing dangerously. The DB-605 was gasping, trying to maintain power at altitude where air was desperately thin. That's when he saw it in his mirror. A fighter. Not a Thunderbolt. Something different. Slender fuselage, inline engine, bubble canopy offering panoramic visibility, checkerboard markings on the nose, fast, very fast, not turning, just closing with geometric inevitability. Pure energy tactics. Hartman's survival instinct registered simultaneous impressions. The fighter was perhaps 400 miles per hour, maybe faster. His own speed, 280. You didn't outturn an enemy with that energy advantage. You didn't outclimb him. You didn't outrun him. You made him overshoot. Hartman snap-rolled inverted and pulled through into a brutal split S, trading all his altitude for speed. The acceleration crushed him into his seat. The airframe groaned under stress. Negative G-forces lifted him against his harness. Blood pooled in his head, pressing behind his eyes with sickening pressure. The altimeter unwound like a broken clock. 25,000 feet. 20. 18. 15. The American followed. Hartman watched in his mirrors, judging closure rate. The pilot was good, patient, letting geometry do the work, maintaining position above and behind. No wasted motion, just disciplined execution tracking him through sky. At 5,000 feet, Hartman reversed into a maximum rate turn. The stall warning buffeted his stick. He ignored it, holding the turn at the edge of controllability. The Bf-109 shuddered. The wings flexed. Any harder and he'd depart, controlled flight entirely. The Americans swept past, perhaps 300 meters away. Hartman got his first clear look at the aircraft. It was beautiful. Clean, purposeful lines. A bubble canopy offered the pilot unobstructed vision in every direction. Wings that looked thin and sharp, designed in wind tunnels rather than hammered out under pressure of bombing raids. The belly scoop was fascinating. A ventral radiator aerodynamically fared to minimize drag. Then the American turned. Hartman watched with professional horror as the aircraft carved through air at a radius that should have been impossible for its speed. No skid, no slip, just a pure turn bringing the nose around with terrifying precision. He had 3 seconds. Hartman firewalled the throttle-engaged MW-50 emergency power injection and pointed the Bf-109's nose straight at the ground. Temperature gauges redlined immediately, screaming mechanical protest. He had perhaps 90 seconds at this power setting before the DB-605 cooked itself to destruction. The dive took him through 8,000 feet. 6, 4. The airspeed indicator swept past redline. 340, 360, 380. The airframe shook violently. This was coffin corner where metal fatigue met pilot desperation. At 1,000 feet, Hartman pulled out. G-forces crushed him. His vision tunneled to grey, then black at the edges. The altimeter unwound through 700 feet, 600, 500. He hauled back on the stick with both hands. The Bf-109 groaned. Rivets protested. Structural members flexed beyond design limits. At 480 feet, the nose came level. Trees were individual and distinct below. He could see branches, fields, a farmer's wagon on a dirt road. The ground rushed past at 320 miles per hour, close enough to touch. Hartman looked back. The American fighter was gone. He circled once, scanning desperately. Nothing. The bomber stream continued eastward untouched. New fighters circled above the formations like protective guardians. Different fighters, all with that same slender, purposeful configuration. That belly scoop, that bubble canopy. They weren't leaving. For 3 years, American escorts had turned back at the border. The gap had held. Not today. Today, these new fighters remained on station at 30,000 feet with what appeared to be unlimited endurance. Something fundamental had changed. Hartman checked his fuel gauge. 31 gallons, 8 below emergency reserve. His engine temperature was catastrophic. Coolant reading 118 Celsius. Maximum continuous operating temperature 105. He turned west toward home, nursing the overheated DB-605 like a dying horse.
Throttle back to minimum cruise power. Mixture lean. Propeller pitch course. Every adjustment designed to reduce heat preserved the engine for 18 more minutes of flight time. Below, Germany passed slowly. He flew at 2,000 feet, low enough to see detail. Villages, roads, rivers. It all looked so normal. People going about their lives unaware that overhead the arithmetic of air warfare had just shifted decisively. At 12:07 hours, Oschersleben appeared on the horizon. Hartmann entered the pattern on fumes. The fuel gauge showed 9 gallons, perhaps 6 minutes flight time remaining. He configured for landing. Gear down, flaps down, speed 120 miles per hour on final approach. The wheels touched with barely a chirp. He rolled out and taxied to the flight line where ground crews waited. When he shut down the engine, the silence was profound. His hands shook. Not from fear, from adrenaline finally ebbing, from understanding what he'd just seen. Richter climbed onto the wing. "Herr Hauptmann, your engine. I know, it's cooked. I'll need a replacement. We'll have her ready by tomorrow. Tomorrow may be too late." Hartmann climbed out and stood on the wing looking at the sky. Empty now. Blue and innocent. But somewhere up there those new fighters were still flying, still escorting their bombers deep into Germany, still closing the gap that had made German operations possible. Around the airfield, other Bf-109s were landing. Hartmann counted. 12 had launched. 10 were returning. 2 empty parking spaces gaped like missing teeth. Weber's aircraft wasn't among those that returned. Hartmann walked to the operations building slowly. His legs felt unsteady, not from physical exhaustion, from the weight of understanding. He'd been flying combat missions for 5 years. He knew what different aircraft could do. He knew their capabilities, their limitations, their envelope of performance. What he'd just fought was different, not incrementally better, fundamentally superior, faster at altitude, better turning radius at high energy, better visibility, and endurance that rendered the entire German defensive strategy obsolete. The operations officer met him at the door. "Hauptmann Hartmann, mission report." They sat in the cramped debriefing room, the same room where he'd started the day, the same bitter ersatz coffee. But everything had changed. "Contact with enemy bomber formation at 11:34 hours, Hartmann began mechanically. "Made 1 attack pass on trailing box 3rd Combat Wing. Observed strikes on target, no confirmed destruction. Encountered new type of enemy fighter during climb-out." The operations officer looked up. "New type. Slender configuration. Inline engine. Bubble canopy. Ventral radiator scoop. Checkered nose markings. Single seat, single engine. Extremely fast. Possibly 400 miles per hour or better at altitude." "Are you certain it wasn't a P-47 Thunderbolt?" "Certain. This was different, smaller, more streamlined, and it wasn't leaving. It remained over the bomber stream at 30,000 feet for the entire engagement." The officer made notes. "Probable misidentification. The Thunderbolt." "I know what a Thunderbolt looks like," Hartmann interrupted. His voice was harder than he intended. "This wasn't a Thunderbolt. This was something new. Something better." Silence. The operations officer continued writing without looking up. "Anything else?" "Lieutenant Weber did not return." "Noted. His next of kin will be informed. Dismissed." Hartmann stood. At the door he paused. "That new fighter. If I could examine one, I could provide more detail. If such an aircraft exists, and if one is captured, appropriate personnel will conduct analysis. That is not your concern, Hauptmann. With respect, it should be everyone's concern." He left before the officer could respond. Outside, the afternoon sun had burned through clouds. The temperature had risen to perhaps 2 Celsius, almost warm. Ground crews worked on aircraft, replacing spark plugs, patching bullet holes, refueling tanks. The routine of war. Hartmann walked to Weber's empty parking space. The concrete was stained with old oil. Tire marks from the last time the boy had taxied out showed in frost. Mechanics were already beginning to clear the space for another aircraft, another pilot. 19 years old, 47 training hours, 8 combat missions, now a statistic. Someone would write to Weber's mother. Some officer with a desk job would compose careful sentences about duty and honor and sacrifice. The mother would receive an official letter expressing regret. She would never know that her son died because American industry had developed a fighter that rendered German tactics obsolete, because the physics of combat cared nothing for courage or training or desire. Hartmann pulled the photograph from his jacket. Anna and Greta at the zoo. Greta laughing. He stood looking at it for a long time. The reality was clear now. The gap was closing. Perhaps already closed. German interceptors would no longer work unhindered during that blessed window when bombers flew alone. From now on, every mission would involve fighting through escorts. Escorts that were faster, had longer range, better visibility, superior high-altitude performance. The attrition equation had shifted decisively.
He put the photograph away and walked toward his quarters. Tomorrow, there would be another mission, another bomber stream, another generation of escorts. He would fly because that was his duty. He would fight because that was his purpose. But he understood now. Understood what those clean, purposeful lines meant. What that bubble canopy represented. What that ventral radiator scoop signified. It meant someone somewhere had solved problems the Germans couldn't, had taken time to design correctly, to test thoroughly, to manufacture precisely, had resources to build not dozens but hundreds, perhaps thousands. It meant the war's essential equation had changed. That evening, Hartmann sat alone in the officers' mess, writing a letter he would never send. Dear Anna and Greta, today I saw the future of aerial combat. It is slender, fast, and American. It will change everything. The certainty we relied on, the gap, the blessed window when we could work unhindered, that certainty no longer exists. He stopped writing, crumpled the page, started again. Dear Anna and Greta, I am well. The weather is cold but clear. I flew today and returned safely. That is enough for now. I love you both. I will come home. That is my promise. He sealed the letter and set it aside for morning post. Outside, night had fallen. Somewhere in the darkness, ground crews worked under portable lamps. Somewhere planners drew red lines on maps. Somewhere factories built more fighters to replace the ones that wouldn't come home. And somewhere in hangars across the English Channel, American crews prepared those slender new fighters for tomorrow's mission, fueling them, arming them, checking systems, getting ready to fly deep into Germany, to stay overhead, to close the gap forever. Hartmann extinguished his lamp and sat in darkness. 127 missions complete. How many more until the equations caught up with him? He didn't want to know the answer. March 15th, 1944. Oschersleben Airfield. 06 and 12 hours. 17 days had passed since Hartmann first encountered the new American fighter. 17 days of missions. 17 days of watching the gap disappear. The slender escorts with bubble canopies and checkered noses appeared with increasing frequency. They circled high above bomber streams with arrogant endurance. They didn't leave. They didn't run low on fuel. They simply stayed like predators with unlimited patience. The Luftwaffe had lost 42 pilots in those 17 days. From Hartmann's Staffel alone, 5 had not returned. Their empty parking spaces accumulated like missing teeth in a deteriorating smile. Hartmann stood watching mechanics service his Bf-109. A replacement DB-605 engine had been installed after the previous one died from thermal stress. This new engine had 217 hours on it. Not fresh, but serviceable. At least it would run. Beside him, Lieutenant Klaus Weber stamped his feet against the cold. The boy looked thinner than he had 17 days ago. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. He hadn't been sleeping well. None of them had. Herr Hauptmann, Weber said quietly. About today's mission. What about it? Intelligence says the new American fighters will be present in strength. They're always present now. Yes, Herr Hauptmann. Weber hesitated. The other pilots, they're saying these new fighters are unbeatable, that we should refuse to fly against them. Hartmann turned to look at the boy. 19 years old. 54 training hours now. 15 combat missions. Still alive, which made him either lucky or careful. Probably both. Do you want to refuse? No, Herr Hauptmann, but I want to understand. How do we fight something that's faster, climbs better, and never runs out of fuel? We fight intelligently. We use altitude when we have it. We make one pass and disengage immediately. We don't chase damaged bombers. We don't let them draw us into turning fights at high altitude where they have advantage. Hartmann paused. And we stay together. You stay with me. Understand. Whatever happens, don't separate. I understand. I'm going to keep you alive today, Klaus. The boy's face showed something between gratitude and doubt. Yes, Herr Hauptmann. They walked to the briefing room. 31 pilots assembled, down from 36 a week ago. The attrition was accelerating, some losses to combat, others to accidents. One pilot had simply disappeared aircraft and all somewhere over Germany. No radio call, no wreckage found, just gone. The briefing officer looked tired. He'd been doing this job for 18 months. How many missions had he briefed? How many pilots had he sent out who didn't return? Gentlemen, enemy formation inbound. Estimated strength, 220 B-17 heavy bombers. Altitude 25,000 feet. Target appears to be synthetic fuel facilities near Leipzig. Expected time over target, 13:45 hours. The officer tapped the map. The red lines looked the same as always. The blue circles marking Luftwaffe bases seemed fewer than last week, or maybe that was imagination. Fighter escort, expect heavy presence of P-51 Mustang fighters. Someone in the back spoke up. P-51. That's the designation for the new American fighter. Intelligence has confirmed the type. North American P-51 Mustang. Single seat, single engine. Packard-built Merlin engine.
Range approximately 1,500 miles with external fuel tanks. Service ceiling 41,000 feet. Maximum speed 440 miles per hour at altitude. Silence. Numbers that should have been impossible. 1,500 miles meant they could escort bombers to Berlin and back. 41,000 feet meant German interceptors couldn't climb above them. 440 miles per hour meant nothing German could catch them. Your intercept point will be here 40 kilometers northwest of Leipzig. Launch time 12:30 hours. Expected combat duration 22 minutes maximum. These P-51s will be present throughout the engagement. Tactical recommendation: hit and run attacks only. Avoid prolonged combat. Questions? No one asked questions. What questions were there? Reality spoke for itself. Dismissed. Good hunting. Hartmann and Weber walked to the flight line together. The morning had warmed slightly, perhaps 5 Celsius. Clouds were building to the west. Weather report said scattered at 15,000, broken at 22. Combat would take place above the clouds. At his aircraft, Hartmann performed his pre-flight inspection with unusual care. He checked every rivet, every panel, every control surface. The Bf-109 looked tired. Paint was chipped. Oil stains streaked the cowling. Patches covered old bullet holes. This fighter had been in service since 1942. It showed every hour. Richter, the crew chief, watched him inspect. "She'll fly, Herr Hauptmann. Engine is solid. All systems check out. Ammunition load. Full. 200 rounds for the nose cannon, 300 per MG-131 machine gun, plus the underwing gondolas, 200 rounds each." Hartmann climbed onto the wing. Before entering the cockpit, he looked over at Weber's aircraft parked 50 meters away. The boy was going through his own pre-flight, moving carefully, checking everything twice. Good. Careful pilots lived longer. At 12:30 hours, 14 Bf-109s took off in pairs. Hartmann led. Weber flew on his right wing 500 meters, stepped down and back. The formation climbed northwest at full power, clawing for altitude in cold, dense air. At 15,000 feet, they entered clouds. Visibility dropped to nothing. Grey vapor streamed past canopies. Ice began forming on leading edges. Hartmann watched his airspeed carefully. Ice-added weight changed aerodynamics, could drop you from the sky if you weren't vigilant. They broke into clear air at 22,000 feet. Above the sky was crystalline blue. Below, clouds stretched to every horizon like an ocean of cotton. The formation continued climbing. 24,000, 26, 28. At 29,000 feet, Hartmann leveled. His engine was screaming. The supercharger compressed desperately thin air. Manifold pressure fluctuated, temperature running hot. At this altitude, the DB-605 was giving everything it had just to maintain straight and level flight. His fuel gauge showed 71 gallons. 23 was minimum reserve. 48 available for combat and return. Perhaps 37 minutes of flying time remaining. The radio crackled. "Lead, this is ground control. Bandit formation bearing 095, range 40 kilometers, altitude 25,000. "Acknowledged," Hartmann replied. "Staffel combat spread. Arm weapons." He flipped the switch for his gun sight. The illuminated reticle glowed against the sky ahead. He charged his weapons. The mechanical sounds of ammunition belts engaging was oddly reassuring. At 13:23 hours, they saw the bomber stream. It was larger than intelligence had indicated, not 220 bombers, more like 280. B-17s stretched across 30 miles of sky in their tight defensive boxes. The contrails from hundreds of engines drew white lines that caught the high-altitude sunlight, and above them, circling like sharks, were the escorts. Hartmann counted quickly: 40, 50, perhaps 60 P-51 Mustangs. They flew in loose formations at 32,000 feet, 3,000 above the bombers, positioning themselves between the bombers and any threat from above. "Lead, I count 60-plus bandits," someone called. "Confirmed," Hartmann said. "All aircraft, we're outnumbered 4-1. Standard tactics. Select targets on the trailing edge. One pass. Disengage immediately if escorts react." He didn't say what everyone knew. 4-1 odds meant this would be expensive.
Hartman rolled inverted and pulled through into his attack dive, the altimeter unwound, 29,000, 27, 25. His target was a B-17 in the last box of the formation, flying number 6 position, tail end Charlie, most vulnerable. Defensive fire erupted early.
Black puffs blossomed across his path. The American gunners were experienced now. They led correctly adjusted fire, walked their bursts toward him. The B-17 grew larger in his gun sight. Ball turret, waist guns. The tail gunner tracking him with twin 50 caliber machine guns. Hartman pressed the trigger. His cannons hammered. Tracers arced toward the bomber. He walked his fire across the wing root saw strikes, saw aluminum skin peeling away in bright curls. Close enough now to see the bomber's serial numbers painted on the tail. Close enough to see the tail gunner's face behind his glass canopy. Then he broke left, pulling hard, trading altitude for separation. The B-17's defensive fire followed him. Tracers reached out like fingers. Something struck his left wing with a metallic bang. Warning light on the panel, hydraulic pressure dropping. Not critical yet, but damage. Hartman completed his turn and began climbing back to altitude. His engine screamed in protest. Temperature reading 109 Celsius, 3 degrees above maximum. He eased the throttle back slightly. Behind him, the B-17 continued flying. No visible fire. No separation from formation. He'd hit it, but not hard enough. His radio erupted. Multiple voices overlapping urgent. Indiana, 3 o'clock high. I'm hit. I'm hit. Brake left 7. Brake left. Then a voice Hartman recognized. Weber. Young. Scared. Lead, I have one engaging. Klaus negative. Climb away. I have him lined up. I can. Klaus disengage now. Static. Then nothing. Hartman reversed his turn, looking desperately for Weber's aircraft. The sky was full of aircraft now. Bombers, Bf-109s, and Mustangs. The P-51s had dropped from their perch and were engaging with brutal efficiency. He spotted Weber, 4,000 feet below, diving after a damaged B-17 that was trailing smoke. The boy had committed to the attack, was pressing it home despite orders. And behind Weber, closing with geometric certainty, was a Mustang. Hartman rolled inverted and dove, full throttle, emergency power, MW-50 injection engaged. The DB-605 howled its protest. He had seconds, maybe 10 seconds to cover 4,000 feet. He wouldn't make it. The geometry was wrong. The angles didn't work. Through his canopy, he watched it happen. The Mustang closed to 300 yards. Its nose flashed with gunfire. 6 50 caliber machine guns firing in convergence. The streams of tracers reached across the space between aircraft like deadly threads. Weber's Bf-109 shuddered as rounds struck home. The canopy shattered. The left wing folded upward at an impossible angle, shearing off at the root. The fuselage began tumbling, trailing debris and smoke. Klaus. No response. Just static, and the sound of Hartman's own breathing, too fast, too shallow. The wreckage fell toward the clouds below, tumbling, spinning. No parachute bloomed. Either Weber was dead in the cockpit, or trapped, unable to escape the tumbling aircraft. Hartman pulled out of his dive at 12,000 feet. His vision grayed from G-forces. His hands shook on the stick. Around him the sky was full of combat. Tracers, smoke trails, aircraft maneuvering. But it all seemed distant, underwater, unreal. He looked up. 6 P-51s circled above, watching, waiting. Predators with fuel to spare and altitude advantage. Engaging them would be suicide. His fuel gauge showed 43 gallons, below minimum reserve now. Time to leave or risk running dry before reaching home. All aircraft, this is lead. Disengage. Return to base. Disengage now. The Staffel broke off combat and scattered. Running. The only tactical option remaining. Hartman turned west, keeping low, using clouds for concealment. His hands moved through post-combat checks automatically. Fuel state critical. Temperature catastrophic but holding. Hydraulic pressure marginal. Left aileron response. Sluggish but functional. He could make it home. Probably. Maybe. Behind him, the bomber stream continued east. The Mustangs resumed their protective circles. The sky cleared as if nothing had happened. Just contrails and clouds and empty blue. Hartman flew alone. Weber's voice echoed in his memory. I have one engaging, 19 years old, 54 training hours, 15 combat missions, dead because he'd chased a damaged bomber, broken discipline given the Mustang pilot an easy shot. Dead because reality didn't negotiate with courage or enthusiasm or youth. The flight home took 43 minutes. Hartman landed with 11 gallons remaining, 4 minutes of fuel, margin for error measured in seconds. When he shut down the engine, he sat in the cockpit for a long time. The silence was crushing. Ground crew approached but stopped when they saw his face. They knew. They'd seen it before. They'd see it again. Finally, Hartman climbed out. His legs felt unsteady, not from physical exhaustion, from the weight of failure. Richter approached carefully. Herr Hauptmann, Weber's gone. I see. The crew chief paused. Your aircraft took damage. Left-wing hydraulics aileron actuator. We'll have her fixed by tomorrow. Tomorrow. Another mission. Another attempt to do the impossible with inadequate tools. The operations officer was waiting in the debriefing room. Same questions. Same forms. Hartmann answered mechanically. Time of engagement. Location. Targets. Results. Losses. Lieutenant Weber did not return, he said quietly. Next of kin will be notified. Cause. Shot down by P-51 Mustang. He broke formation to pursue a damaged bomber. Lost situational awareness. Didn't see the fighter closing from behind. Tactical error. He was 19 years old with 54 training hours. What did you expect? The operations officer looked up. That will be all, Hauptmann. Hartmann stood. At the door, he turned back. How many today? 6 losses from the Staffel, 14 across the Gruppe. 14 pilots, 14 families that would receive letters, 14 empty parking spaces, 14 sets of personal effects to pack and ship home. And the bombers? Preliminary reports indicate 3 B-17s destroyed 2 probables. 3 confirmed, 14 losses. The arithmetic was obscene. Outside, the afternoon was cold and grey. Weather had moved in while he'd been in debriefing. Snow flurries drifted down from low clouds. Hartmann walked to Weber's parking space. Already mechanics were removing the boy's personal effects from his locker. A photograph of his parents. A letter from a girl. A good luck charm. Pathetic remnants of a life measured in weeks. Someone handed him an envelope. This arrived in today's mail, Herr Hauptmann, for Lieutenant Weber. The return address showed a woman's handwriting. Weber's mother, from a small village in Bavaria. Hartmann turned the envelope over in his hands. He could feel pages inside. A letter written days ago when Weber was still alive, when his mother still had a son. He couldn't open it, couldn't read words meant for dead eyes. Hold this, he told the mechanic. Include it with his effects when you ship them home. Yes, Herr Hauptmann. Hartmann walked away slowly. Each step felt heavier than the last. Behind him, the work of war continued. Aircraft being repaired, ammunition loaded, fuel trucks making their rounds, the machinery of attrition grinding forward, consuming young men and spitting out statistics. He reached his quarters and sat on his bunk. The room was cold, bare concrete walls, a single window looking out at nothing. He pulled the photograph from his jacket. Anna and Greta. The creases had deepened. The image was fading from handling. I promised to keep him alive, he said to the empty room. I promised. But promises meant nothing against physics. You couldn't negotiate with geometry. You couldn't bargain with energy states and turn radii and closure rates. Weber had died because German fighters were being asked to perform miracles with obsolete tools. The Bf-109 G6 was a good fighter, but good wasn't enough against great. Competence wasn't sufficient against superiority. Someone knocked. Hartmann didn't respond. The knock repeated. Come. The door opened. A young lieutenant stood there, couldn't have been more than 20. Fresh face, eager eyes, probably just arrived from training school. Herr Hauptmann Hartmann. Yes. I'm Lieutenant Fischer. I've been assigned as your new wingman. Of course. The machine didn't stop. Weber was dead, so they sent a replacement. This boy would fly tomorrow, and probably die next week, and another replacement would arrive the week after. How many training hours do you have, Fischer? 62, Herr Hauptmann. 62. 15 more than Weber. Still woefully inadequate. Have you studied the P-51 Mustang recognition briefing? Yes, Herr Hauptmann. Tell me what you know. Fischer recited facts. Single engine, inline configuration, ventral radiator, scoop bubble canopy. Range 1,500 miles. Maximum speed 440 miles per hour. Service ceiling 41,000 feet. 6 50 caliber machine guns. Combat radius 750 miles with external tanks. And our Bf-109. Maximum speed 390 miles per hour. Range 400 miles. Service ceiling 39,000 feet. But effective combat ceiling is lower, approximately 28,000. So they're faster, fly higher, go farther and see better. Do you understand what that means tactically? We must use hit-and-run tactics, Herr Hauptmann. Avoid sustained combat. And if you find yourself engaged with a Mustang at altitude with no energy advantage? Fischer hesitated. Disengage if possible. The correct answer is run. Dive away. Use your roll rate to break tracking. Don't try to fight. Don't try to outturn them. Run. Because the pilot who tries to fight dies. Do you understand? Yes, Herr Hauptmann. My last wingman didn't understand, or didn't believe, or thought he was special. He's dead now, 19 years old. Shot down this afternoon. I'm going to try to keep you alive tomorrow, Fisher. But I need you to help me do that. Stay in formation. Follow orders. Don't chase damaged bombers. Don't break discipline. Can you do that? Yes, Herr Hauptmann. Good. Briefing is at 0600. Don't be late. Fisher saluted and left. The door closed. Hartmann sat in silence. Tomorrow there would be another mission. More bombers, more Mustangs, more pilots who wouldn't return. The attrition rate was unsustainable. Every day the Luftwaffe lost pilots faster than training schools could replace them. Every day America built more fighters and trained more pilots. It was an equation with only one solution.
But tomorrow he would fly anyway, because that was his duty, because someone had to try, because giving up meant the bombers flew unopposed to destroy synthetic fuel plants and ball-bearing factories and marshalling yards, meant Germany's war industry ground to a halt, meant the end came faster. So he would fly, and Fisher would fly, and some of them would die, and replacements would arrive, and the cycle would continue until there were no more pilots or no more aircraft or no more Germany to defend. He lay back on the bunk, still holding the photograph. Outside, the snow continued falling. Somewhere an officer typed casualty reports. Somewhere 14 letters were being composed to 14 families. Hartmann closed his eyes. 128 missions complete. How many more? He didn't want to know the answer. April 15th, 1944. Kassel, Germany. 13:47 hours. First Lieutenant Jack Redford pushed the P-51B Mustang's throttle forward, maintaining position 200 yards behind and slightly above his flight lead. The Packard Merlin engine purred smoothly at 2,300 RPM, 32 inches of manifold pressure. Cruise power. The engine could run at these settings all day without complaint. Redford scanned his instruments. Oil pressure, 73 pounds. Coolant temperature, 98 Celsius. Fuel, 75 gallons remaining in the main tank, plus 2 external drop tanks nearly empty. Everything in the green. Outside his bubble canopy, the sky was perfect. Clear blue extending to every horizon. Below Germany stretched away in brown and green patchwork. Villages, forests, rivers reflecting afternoon sunlight. Pretty country if you ignored the fact that people down there were trying to kill you. The mission had been routine. 4 hours, 17 minutes airborne so far. They'd escorted B-17s to a synthetic oil plant near Magdeburg. Watched the bombs fall. Watched German fighters make a few half-hearted passes before running. Routine. Now they were heading home. The bomber stream was already west of them, making for the Channel. Redford's flight of 4 Mustangs flew top cover the last fighters over Germany, making sure no late-arriving interceptors caught the bombers. His radio crackled. Blue 1, this is Blue 3. Redford recognized the voice. Lieutenant James Mitchell, his wingman for the past 6 months. Good pilot. Steady. Go ahead, 3. I'm showing oil pressure drop. Redford's attention sharpened. Oil pressure problems in the Merlin were serious. What's your reading? Dropping through 40 pounds. Critical. Normal was 70 to 80 pounds. Below 30 the engine would seize. Temperature. Climbing. 93 and rising. Can you make the channel? Pause. Redford imagined Mitchell doing the calculation. Distance to friendly territory approximately 210 miles. Fuel state probably similar to Redford's. Engine failing. The arithmetic was brutal. Negative lead. I need to put her down. Understood. I'm with you. Redford keyed the flight frequency. Blue 1 and 3 are detaching. Engine casualty. Continuing to home plate Blues 2 and 4. Roger lead. Good luck. Redford slid into position beside Mitchell's Mustang. Even from 200 yards away he could see the problem. White smoke streamed from the cowling, oil vapor burning on the exhaust stacks. Not good. Oil pressure is zeroing, Mitchell reported. His voice was calm, professional. I'm going to dead stick it from here. Copy. I see a field at your 10 o'clock about 8 miles. Looks clear. They descended together. At 15,000 feet, Mitchell's propeller stopped turning. The Merlin had seized completely. The sudden silence must have been eerie. No engine roar. Just wind noise and the high-altitude whistle of air over the canopy. Mitchell trimmed for best glide. 120 miles per hour. No power available, just gravity and aerodynamics. One chance to get this right. No go-around. No second attempt. Redford orbited above, watching. Below the field grew larger. Ploughed earth. Brown dirt. No visible obstacles. About 800 yards long. Enough space if Mitchell judged it correctly. At 1,000 feet, Mitchell lowered his gear. The wheels extended, adding drag, steepening the glide. At 500 feet, he extended flaps. The Mustang slowed, nose dropping. Redford held his breath. The P-51 touched down hard. Dirt sprayed from the wheels. The aircraft ploughed forward, nose high, main gear digging into soft earth. It slewed left then right, main gear acting like rudders in the ploughed field. 200 yards. 150. 100. The Mustang spun 90 degrees and stopped sitting at an angle in the field intact. Mitchell's canopy opened immediately. He stood up in the cockpit, waved to show he was unhurt, then jumped down and started running toward the tree line. Good. Get away from the aircraft. Germans would be coming. Then Redford saw the trucks. 2 Wehrmacht vehicles bouncing across the field from a road half a mile away. They'd seen the landing, were responding fast. Maybe 3 minutes until they reached the aircraft. Redford descended to 500 feet, considering options. He could strafe the trucks. 6 50-caliber machine guns would turn those vehicles into scrap metal. But Geneva Convention rules were clear about rescue personnel. Besides, Mitchell was running. The pilot would make it to the trees before the trucks arrived. Mitchell reached the tree line and disappeared into shadows. Good. He'd evade. Make contact with the underground, maybe. Get home eventually. Or become a POW. Either way, alive. The Wehrmacht trucks reached the Mustang. Soldiers jumped out surrounding the aircraft with weapons ready. They'd expected to capture a pilot. Found an empty cockpit instead. Redford climbed back to altitude. His fuel gauge showed 71 gallons, enough to reach England with comfortable margin. His job now was to get home and report the loss. The intelligence people would want to know location, circumstances, condition of the aircraft. He took one last look down. The P-51 sat in the German field silver in afternoon sun, intact. The Germans would recover it, study it, learn from it. Let them learn, Redford thought. Let them see what they're up against. Let them understand why this war is already over. He turned west and firewalled the throttle. The Merlin responded instantly, smooth, powerful, reliable, 1,380 horsepower, pushing him toward home at 410 miles per hour. Below, Germany fell behind. He crossed the border at 30,000 feet. Still had fuel for another 90 minutes if needed. Could have stayed over Germany all day if the mission required it. That was the beauty of the Mustang. Endurance that rendered enemy tactics obsolete. Game changer. 2 hours later, Redford touched down at his base in England. He taxied to the ramp, shut down, and climbed out. The crew chief was waiting. "How'd she run, Lieutenant?" "Perfect. Not a single hiccup in 7 hours." Redford pulled off his gloves. "But Mitchell's down in Germany. Engine failure. He got her down intact. Aircraft is probably captured." The crew chief's face fell. "The aircraft? P-51B, serial 436819. Marie. Sitting in a ploughed field about 40 miles east of Kassel. Germans will have it by now." "Hell. Yeah." Redford walked to the operations building. The intelligence officer would want a full report. Location, condition, whether Mitchell attempted destruction. Standard procedure. But as he walked, Redford found himself thinking about that silver aircraft sitting in German mud. Intact. All its secrets available for examination. The laminar flow wing, the Meredith radiator, the 2-stage Merlin, the long-range fuel system. Let them study it, he thought. Let them measure and analyze and test. Let them understand exactly how far behind they are. Let them see what American engineering and American industry can produce when given proper time and resources. Maybe it would teach them something. Maybe it would convince someone that continuing this war was pointless. The facts didn't lie. April 15th, 1944. Rechlin Test Center, Germany. 1830 hours. Major Oskar Brenwald sat in his small office reviewing a report on captured Soviet aircraft when the telephone rang. He picked up the heavy handset. "Brenwald. Herr Major, this is Oberst Dietrich, local Feldgendarmerie, Kassel district. We have recovered an American fighter aircraft, undamaged. The pilot escaped, but the aircraft is intact." Brenwald sat forward. "Type. Unknown to us, Herr Major. Single engine, inline configuration. The local commander described it as slender with a large canopy and unusual belly radiator. American markings." Brenwald felt his pulse quicken. This was the fighter. The one intelligence had designated P-51 Mustang, the one killing Staffels across Germany. Condition. The pilot attempted destruction with thermite grenades, but they failed to ignite. Weather has been damp. Our men arrived before he could try other methods. The aircraft appears 98% intact. Landing gear damaged from the rough field landing, but otherwise complete. Guard it. I want armed security until I arrive. No one examines it. No one touches it except to move it under cover. Understood. Understood, Herr Mayor. I'll be there in 2.5 hours. Brenwald hung up and stood. His right hand, the one he'd lost over France in 1940, ached phantom-like in the cold. Psychosomatic, the doctors said. The nerves remembering pain that no longer had a source. He pulled on his coat and cap, called for his pilot. Within 20 minutes they were airborne in a Fiesler Storch heading west toward Kassel. Brenwald was 42 years old. He'd been a test pilot before the war, 1,847 flight hours across 23 different types. He'd lost his hand when a captured French fighter suffered structural failure during a test flight. The resulting crash had ended his flying career, but not his usefulness. Now he commanded Rechlin Test Center, evaluating captured enemy aircraft. He'd examined 47 Allied types since taking command. British Spitfires, Soviet Yaks, American Thunderbolts. Each taught lessons about enemy capabilities, manufacturing techniques, design philosophy. But this one was different. This was the fighter that had changed the air war's equation. The one that escorted bombers to any target in Germany and returned. The one German pilots couldn't outrun, couldn't outclimb, couldn't outlast. This one mattered. The Storch droned westward at 90 miles per hour, slow, painful. Below Germany passed in twilight shadows, towns, rivers, roads. Everything looked peaceful from altitude. Hard to believe that just hours ago hundreds of bombers had crossed this same sky-raining destruction. At 2,047 hours, the Storch landed in a field near Kassel. Wehrmacht guards had established a perimeter. Portable floodlights powered by a generator illuminated the captured fighter. Brenwald walked slowly toward it. The aircraft sat at an angle in the ploughed field nose, slightly high main gear dug into soft earth. Silver aluminum skin reflected the harsh floodlight glare. It looked alien here, too clean, too modern, like something from a future war. Brenwald circled slowly, studying every detail. The fuselage was slender, perhaps 30 feet nose to tail, streamlined with careful attention to drag reduction. No unnecessary protrusions, no rough edges, every panel smooth and flush riveted. The cockpit was positioned aft of center, optimizing center of gravity for handling. The bubble canopy offered panoramic visibility. Brenwald compared it mentally to the framed canopy on the Bf-109. No comparison. This pilot could see in every direction without blind spots. Tactical advantage measured in seconds of reaction time. The wings fascinated him most. Thin, perhaps 11% thickness ratio, perfectly smooth surface. The leading edge had a subtle curve that suggested laminar flow aerodynamics. Brenwald knelt and ran his hand along the surface, smooth as glass. No protruding rivets, no panel gaps. Surface tolerance probably measured in thousandths of an inch. He'd read about laminar flow in technical journals before the war. The theory was sound. Maintain smooth airflow over the wing surface delay boundary layer. Separation reduced drag significantly. But the manufacturing precision required was extreme. Apparently the Americans had solved it. He moved to the landing gear. Narrow track folding inward with clean doors. Every detail designed to minimize drag. Even the tail wheel retracted completely. The Germans left their tail wheels exposed. Simpler. But the Americans went further. The belly radiator drew his attention. A streamlined scoop mounted aft of the wing containing what appeared to be combined coolant and oil radiators. Brenwald knelt and shone his flashlight into the intake. The duct expanded internally, slowing airflow to maximize heat transfer. The exit nozzle was carefully shaped. This was a Meredith effect radiator, theoretical concept from the 1930s. Use the radiator not just to cool, but to recover thrust from heated exhaust air. The Germans put radiators where convenient. The Americans turned cooling into propulsion. Professional admiration warred with strategic despair. He moved forward to the engine cowling. Tight, well-faired. Small inlet feeding the carburetor. Exhaust stacks positioned to create thrust through jet effect. Every detail optimized. Herr Major, a Wehrmacht guard stood at attention. Shall we prepare the aircraft for transport? Yes. Carefully. I want it trucked to Rechlin Test Center. Should take approximately 6 days given current road conditions. Handle it like fine crystal. Understood, Herr Major. Brenwald walked around the Mustang one more time. In the harsh floodlight glare, it looked beautiful. Clean lines, purposeful design, the aesthetic of engineers given time and resources to solve problems correctly. He thought about the young pilots. Boys with 60 training hours being sent up to face this. They would die not from lack of courage but from simple physics. Superior speed, superior altitude, superior endurance, superior visibility. Brenwald lit a cigarette with his left hand. His right arm, ending in a leather glove covering the prosthetic, hung at his side. He smoked slowly, studying the captured Mustang.
This aircraft represented capability. Not just engineering capability, but industrial capability. The precision manufacturing, the quality control, the resources to build not dozens but hundreds, thousands perhaps. Germany built fighters in dispersed factories hiding from bombing, used forced labor, substitute materials. Every shortcut that desperation demanded. America built this. The disparity was absolute. We'll learn from it, Brenwald said quietly to the empty field. We'll measure it, test it, document everything, and it won't matter. Because by the time we understand how they did it, they'll have built 5,000 more. He finished his cigarette and ground it under his boot. Tomorrow the recovery would begin. The Mustang would travel to Rechlin. Engineers would dissect every system. Test pilots would fly it. Intelligence would compile reports. And German pilots would keep dying. Because wars weren't won by understanding enemy weapons. They were won by building more weapons faster. Better weapons. Weapons supported by industrial capacity that dwarfed the enemy's. America had that capacity. Germany did not. The conclusion was inevitable. Some just didn't know it yet. April 20th, 1944. Rechlin Test Center, Germany. 14:30 hours. The P-51B Mustang arrived on a flatbed truck, canvas-covered, escorted by 2 Wehrmacht vehicles with armed guards. 5 days of transport through damaged roads and bombed-out sections of highway. 5 days navigating checkpoints and fuel shortages and bureaucratic obstacles that made moving anything valuable through 1944 Germany an exercise in persistent frustration. Major Oskar Brenwald stood in the cold afternoon air and watched the truck back into Hangar 7. Around him, a small group assembled. Men who understood what this moment meant. Oberst Ernst Vogel, 48 years old, chief aerodynamicist. Thin face, grey hair, eyes that carried the particular exhaustion of brilliant men working with inadequate resources. Vogel had designed improvements for the Bf-109G series, had spent 22 years in aeronautical engineering, had published papers on laminar flow theory in 1938 that no one had the manufacturing capability to implement. Hauptmann Dieter Hartmann, 32, requested specifically as tactical consultant, the frontline pilot who'd first encountered the Mustang in combat, who'd watched his wingman die, who understood what this aircraft meant not from theory, but from geometry and speed and death. 3 senior mechanics, specialists in airframes, engine systems, men with combined experience of 70 years maintaining German fighters. Gentlemen, Brenwald said quietly, this is the weapon that's killing us. Let's understand why. The canvas came off. In the harsh overhead lights of Hangar 7, the Mustang looked even more striking than it had in that muddy field. Someone had cleaned it during transport. The aluminum skin gleamed. The checkered nose markings, black and white squares in a distinctive pattern, stood out sharply. Vogel approached the wing first, moving slowly, reverently. He knelt at the leading edge and ran his hand along the surface. His fingers traced the profile from front to back. His expression shifted through recognition, understanding, resignation. Laminar flow, he said quietly. NACA 66 series airfoil. Look at the smoothness, the precision. He pulled a small gauge from his pocket. Measured surface tolerance at multiple points. Deviation, less than 0.0015 inches, across the entire span. Hartmann stood beside Brenwald, arms crossed, watching the engineers work. What does that mean? Tactically, it means drag reduction of approximately 24% compared to our conventional airfoils, Vogel answered without looking up, which translates to 30 miles per hour additional speed at the same power output, or the same speed with less fuel consumption, or longer range, or better high-altitude performance. Every metric improves. Can we build this? Vogel stood, looked at Brenwald. We theorized this in 1938, published papers, proved the mathematics, but manufacturing precision this exact, he shook his head. Not with our current industrial capacity, not with dispersed factories, not with the workforce we have available. Silence. The kind that acknowledged uncomfortable truths. One of the mechanics called out from the rear fuselage, Herr Oberst, you should see this radiator installation. They moved aft. The ventral scoop was more impressive up close. Brenwald knelt and examined the intake. The duct expanded smoothly, no corners, no sharp transitions. At the radiator face, the opening was large enough to slow airflow to perhaps 1/3 of free stream velocity. Behind the radiator, the duct converged again, accelerating the heated air through an exit nozzle, carefully shaped and positioned. Meredith effect, Vogel said. Theoretical since 1935. If you design the duct correctly, heated air expands through the exit and creates thrust. You recover most of the cooling drag penalty. Maybe achieve net zero drag, possibly slight thrust. Does it actually work? Hartman asked. Apparently. Otherwise they wouldn't design it this way. Americans are pragmatic engineers. They don't build theoretical concepts into production aircraft unless testing proves functionality. Brenvold traced the duct shape with his left hand. His right arm, ending in the prosthetic, hung useless. Compare this to our systems. The Bf-109 uses underwing radiators, Vogel explained. Simple, reliable, but significant drag penalty. Perhaps 280 pounds of drag at cruise speed. The FW-190's radial engine eliminates liquid cooling but creates frontal area drag. This American design turns a necessary evil into near advantage. They spent 2 hours examining the external structure. Every panel, every rivet, every surface. The mechanics photographed, measured, documented. Vogel made detailed sketches. Hartman listened and learned translating engineering concepts into tactical implications. At 16:47 hours, they opened the cowling. The Packard V-1650 Merlin sat like mechanical sculpture, a 60-degree V-12 displacing 27 litres. Even damaged and seized from oil starvation, it looked purposeful, clean, precise. Vogel examined the installation with evident fascination. Two-stage, two-speed supercharger. See the intercooler here? Cools the compressed air before it enters the cylinder. Allows higher boost without detonation. More power at altitude. How much more? Brenvold asked. Our DB605 produces 1,475 horsepower at takeoff, but at 25,000 feet power drops to perhaps 890 horsepower. Single-stage supercharger simply can't maintain boost at altitude. Vogel pointed to the Merlin's supercharger assembly. This system shifts to high gear automatically above approximately 20,000 feet, maintains boost, probably delivers 1,380 horsepower at 25,000 feet, 55% more power than our engine at combat altitude. Hartman absorbed this. That's why they can climb with us. Why they maintain maneuverability at altitude where we're struggling. Exactly. At 25,000 feet, you're fighting physics. They're flying normally. One of the mechanics called from inside the cockpit. Herr Major, there are documents here. Pilot notes. Performance charts. Brenvold climbed onto the wing. The cockpit was cramped, but well organized. Large instruments positioned logically. Illuminated gun sight. Radio panel that looked like commercial airliner equipment. Simple stick grip with trigger and camera button. Throttle quadrant with mixture propeller pitch supercharger controls. And switches. So many switches. Tucked beside the seat was a small folder. The American pilot must have overlooked it during his escape attempt. Brenvold pulled it out. Performance charts. Normal operating procedures. Emergency procedures. All in English but readable. Get a translator, he ordered. I want every page documented and interpreted. He climbed down. The group assembled in Hangar 7's small briefing room. A blackboard, wooden chairs, weak coffee in chipped cups. Brenvold spread the captured documents on a table. Preliminary assessment, he said. Before we begin detailed analysis, what have we learned? Vogel spoke first. The Mustang represents fully integrated design optimization. Every system serves the primary mission, long-range, high-altitude escort. Laminar wing provides efficiency. Meredith radiator minimizes cooling drag. Two-stage Merlin maintains altitude power. Large fuel capacity. He consulted his notes. Estimated 184 gallons internal plus external tanks, provides range exceeding 1,500 miles. Compare our Bf-109 400-mile combat radius, FW-190, similar. Visibility, Hartman interjected. The bubble canopy offers 320 degrees of unobstructed vision. Our framed canopy perhaps 200 degrees with significant blind spots. That alone, Hartman said quietly, is worth 5 minutes of survival time. Seeing the threat early means reacting early. Reacting early means living. Brenvold nodded. Armament. 6 50 caliber Browning machine guns, 3 per wing, approximately 1,880 rounds total. Convergence set at 300 yards based on the gun sight calibration. Rate of fire approximately 850 rounds per minute per gun. Combined firepower 5,100 rounds per minute. Our Gustav carries one 20mm cannon and two 13mm machine guns in the nose, plus two 20mm gondola cannons. Slower rate of fire, but heavier projectiles. Different philosophy, Vogel observed. Americans use volume of fire, we use projectile weight. Both approaches work. Except they have endurance to make multiple attacks, Hartman noted. We get 2 passes, maybe 3 before fuel forces us home. They can make 10 passes if needed. Silence again. The facts were adding up to an uncomfortable conclusion. Can we replicate this aircraft? Brenvold asked bluntly. Vogel set down his coffee, chose words carefully. Technically, perhaps. With 2 years of development and unlimited resources, practically no. We lack the alloys for the Merlin. We lack precision manufacturing for the laminar wing. We lack fuel for extended operations. We lack time to develop, test, and tool up for production. And even if we could, one of the mechanics added, the Americans produce these at rates we cannot match. Intelligence estimates 40 to 50 aircraft daily from North American Aviation's California plant alone. While we build 15 fighters total per day, Brenvold said, across all types, and that number decreases each month as factories are bombed. The room settled into quiet acknowledgement. They were engineers, men who dealt in facts and physics and measurable reality. The story was clear. Not a story anyone wanted to hear, but truth didn't care about preferences. We'll continue detailed analysis, Brenvold said. Strip every system, document everything, but we need to test fly it. Need to understand handling characteristics, performance envelope, what it feels like to fight against or fly. The engine is seized, Vogel noted. Source a replacement. Salvage depot must have recovered Merlins from other crashes. Find one that's functional. Yes, Herr Major. And send word to Hauptmann Leonhard Adler. Tell him we have a special project that requires his expertise. April 23, 1944. Rechlin Test Center, Engine Shop. The replacement Merlin arrived from Kottingen Salvage Depot in a wooden crate. Packard V-1650-3, serial number indecipherable from fire damage on the data plate. Recovered from a P-51 shot down near Munich 3 weeks prior. Flak damage to the aircraft. Fire. Crash. But the engine block remained intact. Oberfeldwebel Karl Richter, chief mechanic, supervised installation. 54 years old. 30 years maintaining aircraft engines. He'd worked on everything from First War rotaries to modern inline V-12s. His hands were scarred from 1,000 minor injuries. His knowledge was encyclopedic. 6 days to install the Merlin, working from hastily translated English manuals and photographs. Mounting it on tubular steel bearers that distributed load across 4 attachment points. Connecting coolant lines, oil lines, fuel lines, electrical harness control cables. Everything had to mate precisely. The American engineers had designed for maintainability. Panels opened easily. Lines were color-coded. Connections were standardized. It showed a manufacturing philosophy focused on field operations, on maintenance crews working in mud under portable lamps, on keeping aircraft flying with minimum downtime. German aircraft were precise, but American aircraft were practical.
On April 27th at 1100 hours, Richter completed final connections, ran ground checks, electrical systems functional, hydraulics pressure holding, fuel system no leaks, controls full and free movement. At 12:45 hours they were ready for engine run. Hauptmann Leonhard Adler arrived at 1300, 35 years old, test pilot for 8 years, combat veteran from Poland, France, Russia, 2,187 flight hours across 31 different types. Known throughout Rechlin for brutally honest reports that sometimes contradicted official optimism. Adler had cold blue eyes and the economy of movement that came from years of experience. He walked around the Mustang, slowly examining it with the same intensity he applied to every aircraft before first flight. Brenvold met him beside the wing. Hauptmann Adler, thank you for coming. Herr Major. They shook hands. So this is the aircraft everyone's talking about. This is the P-51B Mustang.
American long-range escort fighter. We need it test-flown. Complete performance evaluation. Condition? Replacement engine installed. All systems checked. Ground runs completed. But no technical data, no pilot notes, no performance charts. You'll be flying it blind. Wouldn't be the first time. Adler climbed onto the wing, looked into the cockpit, studied the panel layout. Instruments are clear. American philosophy, larger gauges, simpler presentation. I can work with this. Safety considerations. Unknown handling characteristics. No chase plane. Limited fuel. We only have 50 gallons of captured American 100-octane. Flight time approximately 62 minutes maximum, including reserves. Adler paused. Risk assessment moderate to high, but acceptable given intelligence value. Your call, Hauptmann. Adler smiled slightly. When has risk ever stopped a test pilot? At 14:27 hours, Adler climbed into the Mustang's cockpit. Brenvold stood on the wing, walking him through startup procedures based on translated manuals. Primer pump here, 6 strokes. Mixture control full rich. Throttle cracked 1 inch. Magnetos both. Battery on. Booster coil on. When ready, press starter button. Adler's hands moved over unfamiliar controls. The cockpit smelled different from German aircraft. Different oils, materials. Faint scent of American cigarettes from the previous pilot. Strange how scent carried history. Ready, Adler said. He pressed the starter button. The Merlin coughed once, twice, caught with a rumbling growl that built into smooth, powerful thunder. The propeller blurred,
The airframe trembled with contained energy. Blue smoke puffed from exhausts, quickly clearing. Adler scanned instruments. Oil pressure rising 68 pounds. Coolant temperature climbing gradually. Manifold pressure steady at 30 inches. The Merlin ran smoothly without the roughness characteristic of German engines with hundreds of hours. Brenwald climbed down, gave a thumbs up. Adler released brakes and taxied toward the runway. Ground handling was straightforward. Tail wheels steerable through rudder pedals. Brakes powerful and responsive. Forward visibility excellent, far better than the Bf-109's nose-high taxi attitude that blocked all forward view. At the threshold he ran through takeoff checks. Controls free and correct. Trim set neutral. Mixture rich. Propeller full forward. Flaps up. Oil pressure 71 pounds, temperature rising normally. The tower cleared him. Adler advanced the throttle smoothly. The Mustang accelerated like it wanted to fly. No sluggishness, no hesitation, just clean, purposeful acceleration. The tail came up at 35 miles per hour. Compare that to the Bf-109's 55. Forward visibility improved immediately. Airspeed unwound. 40, 60, 80. At 92 miles per hour, Adler eased back on the stick. The Mustang lifted effortlessly. 780 feet of runway used. He raised the gear. Felt immediate drag reduction. The aircraft accelerated perceptibly, gaining 8 miles per hour without throttle adjustment. Initial climb was impressive. 2,340 feet per minute at 160 miles per hour. The Merlin purred at 2,700 RPM, 48 inches manifold pressure. Climb power. The engine delivered without strain. At 5,000 feet, Adler leveled and began basic handling evaluation. Gentle turns. Feel control response. The ailerons were light, far lighter than the Bf-109's heavy cable-operated controls, maybe 12 pounds of force for full deflection. Roll rate approximately 110 degrees per second. Quick, responsive. Elevator forces harmonized beautifully with ailerons, balanced, no tendency to over-control. The aircraft responded precisely to inputs without requiring constant correction. Rudder required moderate force, but was effective. No adverse yaw in turns. Coordination was intuitive. Stall test next. Power off nose, high speed, bleeding. The Mustang shuddered gently at 97 miles per hour and dropped its nose 8 degrees. No wing drop. No violence. Recovery immediate with power addition. Power on stall at 89 miles per hour. Similar characteristics. Docile. Forgiving. Slow flight at 110 miles per hour. Fully controllable. Responsive. The bubble canopy provided visibility he'd never experienced. 320 degrees of clear vision. He could see directly behind without craning his neck. Could see straight down, straight up. No blind spots. This alone was revolutionary. Situational awareness measured in seconds of reaction time. How many German pilots had died because they couldn't see the attacker closing from behind? At 14:43 hours, Adler climbed to 10,000 feet and ran cruise performance checks. Power setting 2,300 RPM, 32 inches manifold pressure. Speed 312 miles per hour indicated. Fuel flow 0.47 gallons per minute. Temperature reading 195 Celsius, well below the 232 limit. The Merlin was loafing, producing cruise power without strain. Adler checked his watch. 23 minutes flight time elapsed. Fuel remaining 37 gallons. He could fly for another 50 minutes at this power setting. Steep turns next. 4G forces. The Mustang carved through air like on rails. High wing loading, but controls remained responsive. Turn radius approximately 1,240 feet versus an estimated 1,380 for the Bf-109. He reversed. Same result. Crisp. Precise. Predictable. At 14:51 hours, Adler climbed to 20,000 feet. This was the critical test. German fighters became sluggish above 20,000. Controls stiffened. Engines gasped. You fought the aircraft as much as the enemy. The Mustang simply continued flying as if altitude were irrelevant. Control response degraded minimally. Perhaps 10% heavier forces, but still responsive, still precise. The Merlin maintained power approximately 1,340 horsepower available at this altitude. Compare that to the DB605's 890 horsepower. Adler performed the same maneuvers as at 10,000 feet. Turns, climbs, accelerations. The Mustang handled them all without complaint. He keyed the radio. Rechlin Tower, Test 1. Performance at 20,000 feet shows minimal degradation. Repeat aircraft maintains full capability at altitude. Static, then Brenwald's voice. Understood, Test 1. Continue evaluation. Maximum speed run. Adler rolled level and advanced throttle to full power. 3,000 RPM, 67 inches manifold pressure. War emergency power.
The Mustang accelerated smoothly. 320, 350, 380, 400, 420. At 437 miles per hour indicated the speed stabilized. No buffet, no vibration, just smooth, stable flight. Fuel consumption 1.2 gallons per minute at this power, sustainable for brief periods. Combat maneuvers, vertical climbs at 180 miles per hour, maintaining 1800 feet per minute at altitude. Horizontal turns at 4.5 Gs, nose staying on horizon. Energy retention exceptional. Adler understood now. This aircraft could dictate engagement terms at will. It could choose to fight or run. It had speed to escape climb, to gain altitude advantage, endurance to wait for opportunities. The pilot flying this machine held all the cards.
At 1508 hours, 41 minutes flight time, Adler began his return. Fuel remaining 23 gallons. Pattern work at 120 miles per hour. Gear down, solid thunk as wheels locked. Flaps down to landing position 20 degrees. Speed reduced to 108 miles per hour on final approach. The Mustang settled onto the runway with gentle precision. 1100 feet rollout. Nose stayed straight. No tendency to ground loop. Easy. Adler taxied back to Hangar 7. 40 people had gathered. Mechanics, engineers, pilots, administrative officers. Everyone wanted to know. He shut down the engine. The silence after the Merlin stopped was profound. Adler sat in the cockpit for a moment, organizing his thoughts, choosing words that would convey truth without panic. He climbed out slowly. Brenvold waited. Vogel stood beside him with notebook ready. Hartmann was there, arms crossed. And someone Adler didn't recognize, an older major with Iron Cross and Knight's Cross ribbons. Distinguished face. Quiet authority.
Well, the stranger spoke. How does it compare to the Gustav?
Adler removed his helmet, met the man's eyes.
It is better than the Bf-109 G6 in every measurable parameter except initial roll rate. Faster by 40 miles per hour at altitude. Climbs better above 15,000 feet. Visibility is transformative. I could see threats from any angle. Controls harmonized, effective at all altitudes. Endurance extraordinary. He gestured at the fuel gauges visible through the canopy. I used perhaps 20 gallons in 41 minutes, including combat maneuvers at 20,000 feet.
This aircraft can remain over Germany for hours. We measure our combat time in minutes. Silence. The kind that followed unwelcome diagnoses. The distinguished major stepped forward. I'm Major Victor Baer. 180 victories. I need honest assessment.
If I meet one of these over Berlin and I don't have altitude advantage... Adler held his gaze. The moment stretched. Truth was harsh but necessary. Run, Adler said quietly. Dive away. Use your roll rate advantage to break tracking. Don't stay engaged. They have endurance to outlast you. Visibility advantage means they see you first. Fighting them at equal energy states is suicide. Hartmann spoke into the silence. That's what killed my wingman. We didn't run fast enough. Baer's jaw tightened. He stood silent for a long moment, then spoke quietly. How long? Until what, Herr Major? Adler asked. Until there's no one left who knows how to run. Adler met his eyes. 6 months. Maybe less. Baer nodded slowly, saluted with precision, turned and walked away with his back straight, carrying the weight of understanding. The crowd dispersed slowly. Quiet conversations, worried looks. The myth of German fighter superiority had just been shattered by an honest man's assessment.
Evening. April 27th, 1944. Rechlin Test Center Conference Room. They assembled at 1700 hours. Brenvold presiding. Vogel with his engineering analysis. Adler with flight test data. Hartmann providing tactical context. 3 junior engineers taking notes. Complete assessment, Brenvold said. Everything we've learned. Vogel presented first. Technical specifications compiled from measurement and observation. Maximum speed at 25,000 feet, approximately 440 miles per hour based on test flight extrapolation. Service ceiling estimated 41,000 feet, though we only tested to 20,000. Combat radius with external tanks 750 miles. Endurance 7.5 hours maximum with external tanks. Rate of climb 2,340 feet per minute at sea level, extrapolated 1,480 at 25,000. He flipped pages in his notebook.
Compared to Bf-109 G6 speed advantage plus 42 miles per hour at altitude. Climb comparable low altitude superior above 20,000. Endurance plus 4.8 hours advantage. Visibility significantly superior. High altitude handling superior across all parameters. Brenvold made notes. Tactical implications. Hartmann spoke.
The P-51 can escort bombers to any target in Germany and return. The gap we relied on no longer exists. German interceptors must now engage through escort screens at all mission phases. Combined with American numerical superiority, this renders bomber interception extremely costly. Pilot survival rates, Brenwald asked. Direct engagement at equal altitude with equally skilled opponents, perhaps 1 in 4 pilots survives. Against more experienced Americans, worse. Silence settled over the room like ash. Can we develop countermeasures? Brenwald asked. Engineering perspective. Vogel set down his pencil. Replication requires 2-stage supercharged engine which we don't have. Laminar wing manufacturing precision beyond current capability. Extended fuel capacity creates weight and volume constraints. Minimum development time 24 months. Production implementation additional 12 months. This assumes no material shortages, no bombing disruption, no competing priorities. None of which we can assume, Brenwald said quietly. Correct. So we can't match it, can't replicate it, can't develop countermeasures within relevant timeframes. Brenwald looked at each man. What do we tell the fighter groups? The truth, Adler said. Honest tactical assessment. Avoid prolonged engagements. Hit and run only. Disengage immediately when escorts react. Survive. Because dead pilots can't defend anything. Hartmann added, and maybe the truth saves lives. Maybe honest assessment prevents boys with 60 training hours from trying to dogfight Mustangs at altitude. Maybe tactical reality, however harsh, is better than propaganda lies. Brenwald nodded slowly. We'll compile a comprehensive report. Technical specifications, performance data, tactical recommendations, distribution to Fighter Command OKL headquarters technical groups. Will anyone listen? Hartmann asked. Fighter Command has requested I brief senior leadership, May 2nd. They're sending General Ludwig Steiner, General of the Fighter Arm. If anyone will hear truth, it's him. And then we continue doing our jobs. You fly, I test. We document reality, because someone has to bear witness to what's actually happening, not what propaganda says is happening. Late evening. Hangar 7. Hartmann stood alone with the Mustang. The hangar was quiet, cold. Overhead lights created harsh shadows on silver aluminum skin. He walked around the aircraft slowly, ran his hand along the wing's leading edge, felt the perfect smoothness of the laminar flow surface. Precise. Elegant. Everything spoke of resources and time and engineering excellence. This was what had killed Klaus Weber. Not evil, not malice, just superior capability built by a nation with industrial capacity to imagine, design, test, and produce optimal solutions. Weber had been 19. 54 training hours, 15 missions. He'd died chasing a damaged bomber unaware a Mustang was closing from behind. Died because his aircraft couldn't match the enemy's speed or altitude or endurance. How many more boys would die? How many more Webers? The reality was clear now. America produced 40 to 50 Mustangs daily. Germany built 15 fighters total. America trained pilots with 320 hours. Germany was down to 87. America had fuel for unlimited operations. Germany rationed every gallon. The attrition equation had only one solution. Hartmann heard footsteps behind him. Turned. Brenwald approached, his left hand holding a folder, his right arm with its prosthetic hanging motionless. Hauptmann Hartmann. Can't sleep. Too much to think about, Herr Major. Brenwald stood beside him, both men looking at the Mustang. Beautiful aircraft. Beautiful and deadly. The two aren't mutually exclusive. Brenwald paused. I received word this evening. Fighter Command wants me to brief senior leadership. May 2nd. They're sending General Ludwig Steiner, General of the Fighter Arm. Will he listen? Steiner has a reputation for honesty. He protects pilots from political games. If anyone will hear truth, it's him. And then what? Then we see if truth matters more than ideology. They stood in silence for a moment. Then Hartmann spoke quietly. My daughter is 4 years old. I wonder what world she'll grow up in. Not the one we hoped for, Brenwald said. But maybe honesty now, however harsh, prevents worse outcomes later. Or maybe it changes nothing. Then at least we tried. That has to count for something. Hartmann nodded slowly. They stood together in the cold hangar, two professionals who understood that wars were won by capacity, not valor, by factories, not courage. The Mustang sat between them, proof that America had already won this war in the factories of 1942, even if the fighting would continue for years more. Tomorrow would bring May, and with it, the conference that might or might not change anything. But tonight the truth was clear. Outside, night had settled over Rechlin. Somewhere another mission was being planned. Somewhere another boy was writing letters home. Somewhere the machinery of war ground forward. Inevitable, inexorable, complete. May 2nd, 1944. Rechlin Test Center, Germany. 900 hours. General Major Ludwig Steiner arrived in a staff car with an escort of 2 motorcycles. 40 years old. Iron Cross First Class. Knight's Cross with oak leaves. 104 aerial victories before assuming command of fighter forces. Known throughout the Luftwaffe as the general who told Berlin what it didn't want to hear. Brenwald met him at the entrance to Hangar 7. They saluted, then shook hands. Herr General, thank you for coming. Major Brenwald, when my staff tells me you've captured and tested an intact P-51, I clear my schedule. Steiner's eyes were sharp, intelligent. I've been hearing reports about this aircraft for 2 months. Pilots are terrified of it. I need to know if their fear is justified, or if we have a morale problem. With respect, Herr General, their fear is entirely justified. Steiner's expression didn't change. Show me. They walked into the hangar. The Mustang sat under portable lights. Steiner circled it slowly, saying nothing. His hands touched the wing, the fuselage, the belly scoop. He knelt to examine the landing gear, stood to look into the cockpit. After 5 minutes, he spoke. Elegant.
Yes, Herr General. Too elegant. This wasn't designed under pressure. This was designed with time and resources. Steiner turned to Brenwald. Tell me everything. The conference room filled quickly. Steiner at the head of the table, Brenwald to his right. Vogel, Adler, Hartmann arranged opposite. 3 staff officers Steiner had brought. 2 intelligence analysts, a stenographer taking notes. Brenwald began with the capture. Technical condition, transport to Rechlin, initial examination. Then Vogel presented engineering analysis. Laminar wing, Meredith radiator, 2-stage Merlin. Every system explained with precision. Steiner listened without interruption. His face revealed nothing. The staff officers took notes. The intelligence analysts exchanged glances. When Vogel finished, Steiner spoke. Manufacturing assessment. Could we replicate this aircraft? Not within any time frame relevant to the war's outcome, Herr General.
We lack precision tooling, specialized alloys, sufficient fuel, adequate training time for pilots, and most critically, production capacity. Even if we solved every technical challenge, we cannot build aircraft at their rate. Quantify that. Intelligence estimates North American Aviation produces 40 to 50 P-51s daily from their California facility alone. Additional production from other plants. Total monthly production approximately 1,400 aircraft. One of the intelligence analysts spoke up. That number is consistent with our estimates, Herr General. And our production, Steiner asked, though his tone suggested he already knew. March production across all fighter types, 427 aircraft, Herr General, the analyst said quietly. April preliminary figures suggest 390. So the ratio is approximately 3.6 to 1 in their favor, and widening. Yes, Herr General. Silence. The stenographer's pencil scratched against paper. The sound seemed very loud. Steiner turned to Adler. Hauptmann Adler, you flew this aircraft. Your assessment. Adler stood. I test flew the P-51 for 41 minutes, Herr General. Conducted performance evaluation from sea level to 20,000 feet. My assessment, the P-51B is superior to the Bf-109G6 in every measurable parameter except initial roll rate. Quantify superior. Faster by 40 miles per hour at combat altitude. Climbs better above 15,000 feet. Maintains full maneuverability at altitudes where the Gustav is barely controllable. Range approximately 3 times our radius. Endurance 4 to 5 hours longer. Visibility from the bubble canopy provides situational awareness impossible in our framed canopies. Combat implications. At equal energy states and equal altitude, the P-51 dictates engagement terms. It chooses when to fight, when to disengage. The Bf-109 pilot has no initiative. He responds, reacts, and if fortunate, survives. Your recommendation for our pilots facing this aircraft? Adler chose his words carefully. Hit and run attacks only. Maintain altitude advantage when possible. Make 1 pass on bombers and disengage immediately before escorts react. If engaged by P-51s without energy or altitude advantage, the correct tactical decision is to dive away and escape. Fighting them in sustained combat at altitude is... He paused. Inadvisable, Herr General. One of Steiner's staff officers spoke. That sounds like retreat. That sounds like surviving to fly another day, Adler replied evenly. Dead pilots defend nothing. Steiner raised a hand, silencing any response. Hauptmann Hartmann, you encountered this aircraft in combat before it was captured. Tactical perspective from a line pilot. Hartmann stood. March 6th, I led a 12-ship intercept against a bomber stream. Made 1 attack pass successfully. During climb out, a P-51 engaged. I used every evasion technique I know. Split S to low altitude. Maximum rate turns. Emergency power. The only reason I survived is the American pilot broke off pursuit at 5,000 feet. Why did he break off? I don't know, Herr General. Perhaps low on fuel. Perhaps recalled by his controller. Perhaps... Hartmann hesitated. Perhaps because he didn't need to chase me further. He knew I posed no threat. He could return to escort duty and engage another German fighter who was still a danger to the bombers. Did you learn anything from that encounter? Yes, Herr General. I learned that the gap, the window when American bombers flew unescorted, no longer exists. The P-51 has the range to escort bombers to any target in Germany and return. Every mission now involves fighting through escorts. The fundamental arithmetic of our defensive strategy has changed. Steiner nodded slowly. And your wingman? Lost 9 days later, Herr General, Lieutenant Klaus Weber.
19 years old, 54 training hours, shot down by a P-51 when he broke formation to pursue a damaged bomber. He never saw the fighter that killed him. And you've trained a replacement? Yes, Herr General. Lieutenant Fischer, 62 training hours. I'm trying to keep him alive. Honest tactical assessment helps. Propaganda about German fighter superiority does not. Steiner leaned back in his chair. Gentlemen, I'm going to share some numbers. Some of you may already know these. Others may find them sobering. He opened a folder. March 1944. Luftwaffe fighter losses 2,140 aircraft. Pilot losses 1,637, including killed, missing and wounded. Production 427 replacement aircraft. Replacement pilots from training schools 740 with an average of 87 training hours. He looked up. We are losing pilots faster than we can train them.
We are losing aircraft faster than we can build them. And the gap between losses and replacements is widening every month. This is not sustainable. One of the staff officers started to speak. Steiner silenced him with a look. The question before us is simple, Steiner continued. What do we do with this information? Do we continue telling pilots they're flying the best fighters in the world, or do we give them honest tactical assessment so they can survive longer? Brenwald spoke. Herr General, if I may, the Mustang represents more than just a superior fighter. It represents industrial capacity. The Americans have resources to design optimal solutions, time to test thoroughly, precision manufacturing to build correctly, and production volume to field them in overwhelming numbers. We cannot match any of these factors. You're saying the war is lost. I'm saying the air war's outcome is determined by industrial capacity established years ago. What happens now is simply arithmetic working itself out. Steiner stood and walked to the window. Outside, mechanics worked on a Bf-109. Young men servicing an aircraft designed in 1935, modified, repeatedly pushed beyond its design envelope because nothing better existed. I have been arguing with Berlin for 18 months, Steiner said quietly, arguing for more training time for pilots, more fuel for operations, better aircraft development, realistic tactical doctrine. He turned back to the room. I have lost every argument, not because my arguments were wrong, because resources don't exist, because priorities are elsewhere, because admitting the reality of our situation is politically unacceptable. He returned to the table. But I can do one thing. I can tell our fighter groups the truth about what they're facing. I can issue tactical directives based on reality, not optimism. And I can recommend that we stop wasting experienced pilots in futile attacks against overwhelming escort superiority. Sir, if we cease attacks on the bombers, one staff officer began. I didn't say cease attacks. I said stop wasting pilots. Hit and run. Survival-focused tactics. Keep our experienced pilots alive because we cannot replace them. Steiner looked at each person in the room. The strategic air campaign against Germany will continue regardless of what we do. But if we husband our resources intelligently, we preserve some capability for whatever comes next. Silence. Everyone understood what whatever comes next meant. The invasion, the final battles, the end. This assessment will be classified Geheim, Steiner said. Restricted distribution to fighter group commanders and above. But the tactical recommendations will be issued immediately. Major Brenwald, I want your complete technical report delivered to my office within 1 week. Yes, Herr General. Hauptmann Adler, I want you to conduct recognition training for selected fighter pilots. Teach them exactly what this aircraft can do, how to identify it quickly, and how to survive encounters with it. Yes, Herr General. Hauptmann Hartmann, return to your unit. Share what you've learned here. Not the politics, not the strategic implications, just the tactics that might keep your pilots alive another day. Yes, Herr General. Steiner gathered his papers. Gentlemen, I thank you for your professional honesty. It's rarer than it should be. He paused at the door. The Mustang, what will you do with it? Preserve it for continued study and training, Herr General, Brenwald said. Good. Let it serve as a reminder. We are not defeated by lack of courage. We are defeated by lack of capacity. There is no shame in that. Only reality. Steiner left. His staff officers and analysts followed. The stenographer gathered her notes. In the conference room, the remaining men sat in silence. Finally, Vogel spoke.
Will it change anything? Steiner will issue honest tactical directives, Brenwald said. Some pilots will follow them and live longer. Others won't and will die. As for the strategic situation, he shrugged. That was decided in 1942 when America's industrial base fully mobilized. So this was all academic, Hartmann asked. No, Adler said. Honest assessment gives pilots a chance. Propaganda gives them false confidence and early graves. If we save even a few lives with truth, it matters. Hartmann stood. I should return to my unit. Fischer will be wondering where I've been. Keep him alive as long as you can, Brenwald said. I'll try. That's all any of us can do now. Try. May 15th, 1944. Oschersleben Airfield. Hartmann stood in another briefing. Same room, same maps. Different officer, the previous one had been reassigned. 31 pilots down from 36 6 weeks ago. But something had changed. The briefing officer, a newly promoted Hauptmann, spoke with different tone. Gentlemen, new tactical directives from Fighter Command. Effective immediately engagement priorities are as follows. First, survival of aircraft and pilot. Second, disruption of bomber formations. Third, destruction of bombers when achievable without excessive risk. Murmurs through the room. This was different. This was honest. P-51 Mustang escorts will be present throughout the mission, the officer continued. If engaged by escorts, immediate disengagement is authorized and expected. Diving to low altitude and escaping is not cowardice. It is correct tactical decision-making. You cannot defend Germany if you are dead. After the briefing, Fischer approached Hartmann. Herr Hauptmann, the directives you mentioned, they're official now. Yes. So we run when necessary. We survive when necessary. Then we fight again tomorrow. That's the new arithmetic. They walked to their aircraft.
Fischer climbed into his Bf-109. Hartmann watched the boy, 20 years old, 62 training hours, strap in and begin his checks. How long would Fischer last? The new tactics might give him weeks instead of days. Weeks was better than days. Hartmann climbed into his own cockpit. Mission 141. The same instrument panel, the same controls, but different understanding. He pulled out the photograph. Anna and Greta. The creases were deep now, the image barely visible, but he could still see Greta's smile. I'm still trying, he told the faded image. That's all I can promise. I'm still trying. He put it away and started the engine. June 1944. Operation Overlord commenced. P-51 Mustangs flew top cover over the invasion beaches. German fighter opposition was minimal. Most experienced pilots were dead. Most aircraft were destroyed. The new tactics had preserved some capability, but not enough to matter. December 17, 1944.
Major Victor Baer, 192 victories, was shot down near Nuremberg by a P-51 Mustang. He had survived 8 months after learning to run. His last radio transmission, "They're everywhere." January 1945. Lieutenant Fischer was killed on his 47th mission. He had survived 5 months longer than most. Hartmann trained another replacement. February 1945. Hauptmann Leonhard Adler was conscripted from test pilot duty to combat operations. He flew 16 missions before being wounded. He survived the war. April 1945. Rechlin Test Center was overrun by Soviet forces. The Mustang was captured intact by Soviet troops. Major Brenwald successfully evacuated all technical documentation to American-controlled territory. He surrendered to U.S. forces May 7, 1945. May 8, 1945. War in Europe ended. Hauptmann Dieter Hartmann flew his final mission, number 187 on Mayfair, the final score 22 aerial victories. He survived.
Post-war accounting, P-51 Mustang production, 15 5 and 86 aircraft total. Combat sorties over Europe, 213 873. German aircraft destroyed in air combat 4950. German aircraft destroyed on ground 4131. US P-51 losses 2 5 and 20. Strategic impact, bomber loss rates dropped from 9.2% before P-51 escorts to 3.4% after. German synthetic fuel production disrupted. Fighter pilot training curtailed due to fuel shortages. Aircraft production forced into dispersed inefficient facilities. Human cost. Luftwaffe pilot average survival time in 1944
4.3 months. American escort pilot average survival time, 11.8 months. Klaus Weber's Staffel March 1944, 16 pilots. Survivors at War's End 3, 1963. Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, Ohio. An Aviation Historical Society organized a reunion. 3 men stood before a restored P-51 Mustang in the museum. Dieter Hartmann, 51, Oberst retired, living in Munich, engineering consultant. Leonhard Adler, 54, test pilot retired.
Moved to Argentina, 1947, returned to Germany, 1959. Jack Redford, 44, Colonel USAF retired. Commercial airline pilot. They stood in awkward silence, 3 men separated by language and history, united by one aircraft. Finally, Hartmann spoke in careful English. "It killed many of my friends." Redford nodded. "It brought me home 74 times. Adler touched the wing. "It was the best aircraft I ever flew, including the ones I designed for." More silence. Then Hartmann continued. "In April 1944, we tested this at Rechlin. I watched. The test pilot Hauptmann Adler here told the truth about what it could do. Our General Steiner listened, issued new tactics, honest tactics." "Did it help?" Redford asked. "Some pilots survived longer because of truth. Many still died because of arithmetic. The numbers—" Hartmann paused, choosing words carefully. "The numbers were always clear. We saw it in April. The war continued another year, but the result was determined years before in factories. This," he gestured at the Mustang, "was just proof." Adler spoke. "I remember most how quiet it was inside. The Merlin purred. Our engines screamed. Even the sound told you which side had resources to refine details." Redford looked at both men. "I'm sorry about your friends. All of them. German-American. Boys dying in machines following orders." "They died doing their duty," Hartmann said. "But the machine didn't make choices. Leaders made choices. In 1942, 1941, earlier. Choices about industry resources, priorities. By 1944, we were just living with the consequences." "The arithmetic," Adler said quietly. "Yes, the arithmetic." They stood together, 3 old pilots before an old aircraft, remembering a war where courage mattered less than capacity, where valor couldn't overcome industrial disparity, where individual skill couldn't change equations written in factory production reports. "My daughter asked me once," Hartmann said, "why we lost. I told her because the Americans asked what perfect would look like and then built it 15,000 times. We asked what we could manage and built that. The difference was everything." Redford nodded slowly. "I never thought of it that way. But yeah, that's about right." They stood in silence for another moment. Then Hartmann checked his watch. "I should go. Flight back to Munich this evening." They shook hands. 3 men who had once been enemies, now just old pilots, sharing memories of machines and mathematics, and the boys who didn't come home. As Hartmann walked away, Redford called after him. "Hauptmann, one question. That general, Steiner. What happened to him?" Hartmann turned back. "He survived the war, spent 2 years in Allied custody. They investigated him for war crimes, found nothing. He had spent 1944 and 1945 trying to keep pilots alive with honest tactics, not propaganda lies. They released him in 1947. He died in 1962. Heart attack. But he saved lives. The numbers proved it." "Good," Redford said. "Good that someone told the truth." "Yes," Hartmann agreed. "Truth didn't change the war's outcome, but it changed how many boys came home. That had to matter." He left. Adler and Redford stood for a few more minutes. Then they too departed, each to their own lives, their own memories. The Mustang remained. Polished aluminum gleaming under museum lights. Beautiful, deadly, perfect. A reminder that wars are won in factories, not cockpits. That capacity defeats courage. That industrial mathematics determine outcomes years before battles are fought. And that sometimes the most important thing is simply telling the truth about what you're facing, even when the truth is harsh. Even when the truth changes nothing except who survives to remember. The numbers never lied. They never do.